Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, That Model Railway Guy, and welcome to part 2 of my PECO 200 diorama competition build. Oh, that was a mouthful. So, if you've seen the first episode, you'll know I've managed to fit an entire 009 layout onto a tiny little baseboard. But while the broad strokes are in place, in this video I really need to knuckle down and get on with the scenics. On that note, this episode is once again sponsored by Specialist Aggregates and their True to Scale range. And oh boy, am I going to be using their stuff a lot in this video. More on that in a little bit, but obviously by the time you see this, the deadline for the competition will have passed. But what I think is so great about this competition is seeing how many people have gotten involved and how different everyone's take on this challenge has been. No two dioramas look alike, and that is incredible to see, and it shows the creativity that is still a huge part of this hobby. I have to say that this competition doesn't really feel like a competition, in a good way. I don't think actually anyone is really concerned about winning or even making it to the final. It would be nice, but in some ways the finished diorama or layout is in a way the reward or the prize. I wouldn't be surprised if in the future we see lots of people expanding them into, larger layouts now that they've already made a start and have something to work with. That in itself is a huge achievement, and PECO really need to be congratulated for putting this whole thing together. And yeah, like I say, it's just been fantastic to see how many people have jumped on board in such a variety of ways. So congratulations to everybody who has been involved. You're all winners as far as I'm concerned. Now, of course, before I can submit my layout to the competition, I need to actually finish it, so let's get on with that, shall we?
So this is where we left off last time, with the track ballasted and the basic landscape already in place. Today I'll be continuing with the ground scatters and scenic work to properly finish off this model railway. I'm starting off with the footpath that runs down from the bridge, and to begin with I put down a base layer of PVA glue. Over this, I'm then sprinkling some universal trail texture from the True to Scale range. This has a really nice dusty pathway colour to it, which I can blend in with the scenics. I'm also building it up around the bottom of the path just to create a smoother transition down to ground level. I'll also use this same texture around the siding too, which ties the area together really nicely. The universal trail texture is really good as a base layer, and because it's so versatile, it can be used in lots of different ways for the scenics. I can also use it across the track too, building it up in between the rails to create a rudimentary foot crossing, seeing as the track does cross right in front of the path. Now, to add in some variation to the colour, I'm sprinkling in some additional scatters like universal concrete. The same thing is also done over the pathway using one of my favourite products, universal ground cover. This helps create a dirtier, well-trodden look to the path, as though it's been used for years. One of the nice things about the True to Scale range is that most of the products are fairly consistent in colour rather than being pre-mixed. That gives you the option of being able to add in other colours and textures at your own ratios to get the exact look that you're after. After all, I don't want everything to look too pristine and clean, I want the world to feel lived in. Now, you might remember from the previous episode that I wanted to create a waste slate heap. Admittedly, this mound is looking a bit odd at the moment, but now it's time to actually add some slate to it. The mound is covered all over in PVA glue, which will allow the loose slate to stick to it as I sprinkle it over the top. Now, this is a special product from Specialist Aggregates that they were able to send out to me just for this build, and I really appreciate them putting this together for me. They'd actually been to Wales recently to collect some slate, and amazingly they were able to scale it down to various different grades, which made it perfect for use on this layout. It looks absolutely fantastic as it goes on, although sadly I'm told that this wouldn't really be viable as a commercial product, so don't be expecting this to pop up in their range anytime soon. With the hill covered in slate, it's looking really good, but I do need to seal all this in place. So I'll give it a quick spray of water, which I found really helps getting the glue to flow when that's added next. When the glue solution is added, I start at the top, just adding a very small amount. It naturally wants to trickle down the sides and seep into all the cracks and crevices, and this will lock all of the loose slate together that isn't sitting in that base layer of PVA glue. And if this is the first time you're watching one of my layout builds, this glue solution is made up of 50% water and 50% PVA glue. Once it's all mixed up, I then add a drop of washing up liquid, or dish soap, and this breaks down the surface tension to stop the solution from balling up into little droplets. This same sealing process is then done for all of the other textures I've added too. Remember, while the bottom layer is sitting in a base layer of PVA, I've added other layers over the top, and so the glue solution is needed to lock all of these in place. And when this dries, it'll also make the surface nice and durable too. Personally, I like adding as many of these textures as I can, and then doing the glue process all in one go. Certainly on a small layout like this, it makes a lot of sense when everything is fairly self-contained, but it also saves time as you do have to wait overnight for this glue to dry. If you do it in lots of small individual sections, then you're adding a lot of extra waiting time to your process. But this way, once the glue dries, I'll have a nice durable surface texture to work from.
So once again, I really do want to give a massive shout out to the sponsors of this series, Specialist Aggregates. As you've just seen, their true to scale range covers a wide range of purposes, and I really wouldn't have been able to pull off this build without their products. At least I don't think it would have looked anywhere near as good without them. I love being able to mix the different colours and the textures together so that you can create some really unique and varied ground covers. And yeah, it just makes everything look so natural, which isn't something I feel I've really been able to do with some of the other traditional model railway scatters that are already out there. I know I said this in the last episode as well, but the guys at True to Scale really do know their stuff. They've got experience with working for the real railways, and so, you know, if you need a type of ballast or ground cover for a particular region or area or time period, they've got the knowledge to point you in the right direction. You can check out their full range on the website, truetoscale.co.uk. I've put some links down in the description with all the stuff that I've used on this particular layout as well. But yeah, I really can't stress enough how this isn't just generic ballast and ground cover. If you want to give your model railway that extra bit of realism, then definitely check out Specialist Aggregates and their True to Scale range. Of course, the scenics are far from done, and now it's time to turn my attention to the scene around the back of the layout.
Like I said in the previous episode, I want this to be a very narrow pass for the railway. I can suggest this more by running some walling in front of the line, and I'm going to do this using my flexible dry stone walling. I went to the effort of making the line have a little bit of a curve here, and I want the walling to follow this quite tightly. Being made from flexible material means it's really easy to bend and manipulate the walling to the shape that I need. For those of you unaware, this is actually something I sell on my website, so do check out the link in the description if you'd like to use this on your own layouts. That said, it is really popular and it always seems to sell out very fast when I mention it in videos, so do get in there quick if you do want some. With the walling in place, I did also just do a quick test to make sure that everything was still working after ballasting the track. I really do like the way the landscape and the walling create a nice narrow pass around this back section. It looks great with the train winding its way between them here, and I'm really excited to get all the scenery done in this area. Moving round to the opposite side of the layout though, I do want to add some rocks to my hill. Now these have been made with plaster of Paris in the Woodland Scenics molds, which I've been using for a while now, and I really like how the rocks always come out. To attach them to the hill, I've just added a little bit of filler to the back of each one, and then I press it into the landscape. Generally, I like to start with the bigger rocks first, and then I fill in the gaps using smaller pieces to build it all up. And the great thing about sticking these in place using filler is that it allows you to adjust and move the rocks that you've already put down as you continue to add more. It's not just the front of the layout that's getting some rocks though, the narrow pass on the other side is getting the same treatment too. I did get a little bit carried away in one area though, where I added a few too many rocks. This section is designed to be quite tight, so it was really important to check the clearances as I went along. As you can see, the PECO coaches were catching on the rocks, so these had to be repositioned. Like I said though, thanks to the filler, this was really easy to do. Once I'd completed positioning all the rocks, I did another clearance check again, and thankfully this time everything was fine.
Just before I carry on with the scenics, if you'll indulge me for a moment, I do just want to remind you that I recently launched a set of slate coasters featuring a collection of Welsh narrow gauge locos. Like I said before, these are engraved onto actual slate, so a really nice pairing to have with some of the locos that are most associated with the slate railways that are featured on them. There's 4 different designs in total, each with a different loco on them, and they're on pre-order in my shop currently, thatmodelrailwayguy.com. There's a link to them down in the description, and as always, should you be interested, please do go check them out. But yeah, I think they're really cool. I've been using these ones myself, and like I said last time out, Christmas is coming up, so it could be a good present, especially if you or someone you know is building a narrow gauge model railway. With that said though, let's get back to the actual layout build.
Before I get round to adding the grass on this layout, I do feel like I should glue the buffer stops in place at the end of the sidings. These are the PECO 009 buffer stops, which I've just painted a dark brown to give the plastic a bit more of a matte finish. White was then dry brushed on the stops just to give it some extra interest, and it's a simple detail but it adds a lot. It was then time for one of my favourite parts of building a model railway, which is adding the static grass, and I decided to start off down the front. I used neat PVA on the baseboard in preparation for my base layer, and this will stretch across the entire front of the layout. I'll also have the grass curve round the corners at each end too, following the line of the track, so the PVA needs to be put down here too. With the glue all down, I then start adding my first layer of static grass. This is added using a fairly cheap applicator, which I've found does the job just fine for my needs, and I'll pop a link to this in the description, along with everything else that I've used in this video. Essentially what this does though is it makes the grass fibres stand up in the glue, exactly like when you rub a balloon on your head to make your hair stand up. Now the static grass in question here is 2mm in length, and generally it's quite a vibrant green. What I tend to do is start off with more saturated grass colours first, and then add more muted tones over the top. In my experience, this creates a much more natural effect and also brings in some nice variation to the colour as well. With the ground level done, more grass can then be added to my hill, and you can see it works just as well here on the plaster surface as it did on the baseboard. Once all the grass is added, it's a good idea to let the glue dry for a while, and then you can reclaim any excess with a handheld vacuum. As you can see, it works really well here to reveal the path again, demonstrating quite nicely that the grass has only stuck to the areas where the PVA glue was added. With the base layer down, I can then move fairly quickly on to adding more layers over the top. I like to use layering spray for this, and it's a really good idea to use a scrap of cardboard just to protect any areas where you don't want this grass to go. A slightly longer 4mm grass is then added over the top, and this will give me a much more natural looking effect. The 2mm grass is great as a base layer, but it does look a little bit like a football pitch in isolation. In comparison, the longer grass feels a bit more wild, and with the slightly more muted colour, like I said before, it adds in some different shades. Once again, the loose grass is cleared off the track using a vacuum, and don't forget you can reuse all this excess at a later date. When it comes to adding a second layer to the hill, I have to be a bit more careful here, so I've used some masking tape over the rocks to prevent the grass sticking to them. I could add the rocks afterwards, I suppose, but by doing it this way around, it feels more like they're bedded into the landscape properly instead of being placed on top of everything else. With the grass now down, I can remove that masking tape and you can see this has kept them nice and clear. The rocks blend into the grass really nicely, and you can see getting the static grass down has really made a huge difference to the layout.
While we just wait for the static grass to all settle, I've mentioned in previous videos that I currently have a discount code with the Talyllyn Railway so that you guys can get 20% off your tickets when you go for a ride. This is actually a deal I'm doing with them as part of my Thomas layout build, but seeing as I'm building a little narrow gauge railway here, it felt appropriate to mention in this video as well. The Talyllyn Railway is a lovely narrow gauge line. I've visited myself in the past and it's a wonderful railway, really great scenic views and just so much atmosphere. So yeah, I can highly recommend a visit. If you do fancy a trip, the code is down in the description, so just use that when you book your tickets to get 20% off. And yeah, I believe they're open daily until the 2nd of November, so don't miss out, and you never know, maybe it could inspire you to build your own 009 model railway.
When it comes to the rear side of the layout, the landscape here is too vertical for the grass to look realistic, but I have a plan. I'll start by adding PVA glue to the sidewall just like I did before. Believe me when I say PVA glue is probably the thing I use most throughout these layout builds. To cover up the wall, I then add some homemade polyfiber to the area, and this creates a nice cascading effect of vines and weeds growing up the vertical face. It's a look I've used on a few different layouts now in various different ways, but it's always great for adding some greenery to steep faces or just adding a little bit of randomness to an area that doesn't look very natural. I'm not using this exclusively round the back though, I've also got some small patches on the yard side of the layout too. Now below this I want to add a bit more colour to the scrubland, and one thing I like to do is add some small tufts of static grass. You can buy ready-made tufts on a sheet, but honestly I find it much easier to just add some small patches of glue. I then add the 4mm static grass directly to this. There's no need for a base layer in this instance as I want it to look thinner and more patchy. Once the excess is removed, you can see I have some nice tufts which blend nicely into the ground cover. We're very much on the home stretch now, but heading back to the rock face, there are a few gaps between the individual rocks that need filling. This is easily done with the help of, yet again, more PVA glue. The nozzle tip on this particular bottle is actually really handy for being able to direct the glue into these cracks. Clump foliage from Woodland Scenics is then pressed into the gaps and the glue. This adds some extra greenery in contrast to the harsher grey tones of the rocks, and generally I like to mix up a few different colours. For the most part I'm using light green and medium green from the Woodland Scenics range. Do be aware though that while you want to have a bit of colour variation, don't go too overboard with different colours, otherwise it can look a bit chaotic. By restricting yourself to just a few different tones, it actually pulls the scene together and makes it feel more consistent. Generally though, this fills in the gaps nicely, and it's really handy for hiding any odd areas that have escaped the scenics so far. It also brings another texture and look to the layout, which is a welcome addition too. Now I did want there to be a reason for the sidings to exist, and I think maybe this is a stopping point for the locos after they've pulled the empty wagons up the hill. Naturally they'll need to fill up with water somehow, and so I've got this wonderful narrow gauge water tower from MS Models. Like the bridge I did in the first episode, it's painted up really nicely. In particular, I love the hose that's draped over the corner, and I think it looks great here just in front of the slate heap. Now around the back, I need to blend in the bottom of the polyfibre, and while I could add more clump foliage here, I have something different in mind. Specialist Aggregates actually sent over a few different grades of their special slate, including some larger pieces too, which I've laid here alongside the track. Again, it's just another nod to the Welsh slate quarries, which were the reason so many of these railways were built, and I love the way they look here along the edge of the line. There's just one last little detail to add, and it concerns these weird angles I cut into the dry stone walling I laid earlier on. These were actually completely intentional, and as I add a little glue to these, my plan here is to create a part of the wall that looks like it's broken down or fallen apart. I've got just enough of the finer slate from earlier to drop into this glue, and that'll represent the loose bits of stone and slate that would have been used to originally build the wall. Again, it's all about making the world feel lived in and not too perfect. I'll add some of my glue solution over the top just to lock the loose particles in place, but with that, I think we're done. So here is the finished layout, and I'm really happy with the final result. One thing I did off camera was to paint the frame of the baseboard black, which I think finishes the layout off really nicely. With that, I've also been thinking about what to call this layout. Now, my 009 layout in a suitcase was called Goved Tin, which according to Google at least is the Welsh translation for tight space. Now I wanted to continue that theme, so I've decided to call this layout Tinach, which translates to tighter. You know, because it's even smaller and tighter than Goved Tin. It really is amazing how much I've managed to fit into the space on this PECO baseboard though. I really wasn't sure whether I could fit a circuit in here in a realistic manner, but I'm really pleased with the result. There's lots of varied scenes with the front and the back feeling very different, and there's nice separation between them too. Most of all though, it's a wonderful little layout that I can set up really easily and just let a train trundle around without any fuss. Now, when it comes to the PECO competition, I very much doubt that Tinach will win. In fact, I don't even think it'll be a finalist. And you know what? That's okay. Every layout or diorama I've seen people create for this competition has been utterly incredible, and they're all so different. To me, that really encapsulates the hobby with the level of individual creativity shown by everyone on their own personal builds. Like I said at the start of this episode, building and completing the layout in itself is enough of a reward, and while Tinach isn't my biggest or most complicated build I've shown on this channel, I love it because it's simple. Sometimes it's nice just to watch some trains weave their way through the scenery, and with that, it's time for this episode to come to an end. I really hope you've enjoyed this mini two-part series, and if you have, please don't forget to subscribe. There's lots more coming on the channel very soon, including the continuation of my main project, A Slice of Sodor, which I'm sure you're all eager for me to get back to. In the meantime though, thank you so much for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!